My name is Elena Brooke Callahan, and for the better part of 8 months, people in the department called me the intern. I was 38 years old, had 2 tours behind me, one Purple Heart, and a shoulder that still clicked when it rained. But to them, I was the quiet woman with a blank ID badge and a notebook no one asked about. I didn't mind. Not really. After Kabul, I'd gotten used to being invisible. The hallway they gave me wasn't even mine. It was just where I ended up. Narrow beige walls, flickering fluorescent light, no chair. I stood. Listened. The door beside me, composite steel and frosted glass, led to the operations conference room, but it might as well have been a different planet. The people behind it wore custom suits, spoke in acronyms, and drank black coffee they didn't finish. I was told not to speak. Not to correct the maps. Not to touch the phone. That part made me laugh quietly because it wasn't connected. I knew that. The red wire had been clipped and tucked beneath the console. Old habit. I'd done the same once in a field safe house to stop an informant from calling his wife the night before he disappeared. I didn't say that, of course. I wrote it down in the back of my notebook where the paper was soft and frayed from humidity. They liked me quiet. They didn't ask what I had done before, and I didn't offer. My name didn't show up on staff memos, and my clearance level was pending review. But sometimes, when the right file landed in the wrong inbox, someone would frown, glance at me, then delete it with 2 keys pressed simultaneously. That's how you know someone's been trained. They never use the mouse for classified deletions. It's always the keyboard. I stayed out of the way. Filed reports I never read. Watched people lie without blinking. Some days, I could tell who'd gotten a call from home by how they walked. It was all pattern recognition. Movement, silence, temperature shifts. You start learning how fear looks when it tries to be calm. One man, Agent Lucero, chewed his pen when briefing the Middle East sector. Until one day, he didn't. 2 weeks later, we got a memo saying he'd been reassigned. I heard later he'd gone to Denver, and 2 months after that, there was a closed casket funeral. The hallway didn't talk about things like that. But I remembered. They didn't know about the notebook. I started it on my second day. Brown leather pages, thin like onion skin. I wrote down what they said when they thought no one was listening. Half sentences, names, locations paired with dates. Words that meant nothing on their own, but everything in context. Rook asset unverified. Clock face delayed due to vector fallout. No eyes on Mather. Mather had been my CO for 6 weeks in Baghdad. He died on a roof with his eyes open. No one outside our unit knew that. So when I heard his name in a whispered debrief, I didn't flinch. I wrote, in the quiet, I remembered things I hadn't let myself in years. A woman's wedding ring still attached to a scorched hand. The rattle of a wounded boy's breath in the dust. The way Captain Ruiz had touched my shoulder before stepping into a building we knew might blow. It did. My fingers had never stopped trembling after that. Just barely, like a current under the skin. They called it a nerve ghost. A polite term for damage no one could find, but that never left. Every Friday at 1400, I watched them brief something called threadlock. The name meant nothing to me, but the map on the screen, Eastern Europe North Quadrant color-coded nodes, was familiar. Too familiar. I'd seen the same configuration in 2012 embedded in a misrouted Turkish military cable intercepted during joint operations. I remembered it because the encryption sequence matched one we'd encountered in Kandahar. I still had the sequence memorized. It wasn't supposed to be there. I didn't say anything, but I circled the date in my notebook. Twice. The following Tuesday, there was a hush on the floor. Real hush. The kind that you don't hear so much as feel like pressure in your lungs. People straightened their ties, adjusted their jackets, cleared desks that were never messy. A man in a black coat entered. Two men flanked him, both military polished. I recognized the accent before he spoke British Southern clipped vowels. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, standing in the middle of my hallway. He wasn't supposed to be there. His visit hadn't been on the calendar. No media, no official motorcade. He stopped in front of the operations door. Said something quietly to the director, who nodded. Then the PM turned slowly and looked directly at me. He smiled. "Bring in Callahan," he said. Every head turned like a mechanical wind-up. The director stammered. She's just the intern." The Prime Minister raised an eyebrow. I said, "Callahan," he repeated. "She knows the code." My heart stopped. Not just from the recognition, but from what he didn't say. Not a file, not a report. Me. He said I knew it. I walked toward the door past a dozen stunned faces. One man whispered my name like he'd only just learned it. The war room was cold. I took the chair I wasn't supposed to take. The Prime Minister leaned in. "Tell me about the Kandahar intercept, the one with the sleeper code. You still remember it, don't you?" I nodded once. My hand didn't shake. They never called me the intern again. The room was too perfect. A square of polished oak, windowless, sealed tight with soundproofing that made the air feel artificial. Someone had spent time preparing it. 3 cameras, 2 visible, 1 hidden in the ceiling corner. A tray with a porcelain teapot and 4 cups, 2 unused, 1 filled, 1 left steaming. No one touched theirs. I'd been briefed not to speak unless spoken to. Observer status, only, the deputy said as he guided me into the room. His hand hovered near the small of my back, but never made contact. Polite pressure. I knew the kind. He'd read something in my file that made him careful. The Prime Minister sat across from me. He didn't look at the others, 2 attachés in black suits. Notebooks, closed pens untouched. He looked at me then, at the chair beside him. "I'd prefer if Miss Callahan sat here." My stomach flicked. They didn't correct him about the miss. They didn't correct him about anything. I sat. He asked about the code again. The sequence, where I first saw it, who had been present. I told him quietly. My voice never rose above a whisper. I remembered the signal shortwave burst transmission trailing identifier, 117RZ. I'd traced it to a hollowed-out signal tower outside Kandahar, where an entire local family had been found dead beneath radio equipment that didn't belong to them. That was 2012. No one had mentioned it since, except him. He smiled faintly, like someone who'd finally found the page they'd been looking for in a book everyone else had misfiled. "You ever wonder why you remembered it when no one else did?" he asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched the steam curl off his tea. Something about it felt too staged. Everything in the room was too curated, like a memory rehearsed. He leaned closer. "We've known about you for a while. But the Americans, they bury their ghosts too deep." I met his eyes. "What do you want from me?" He didn't flinch. Not want. Need. He reached into a leather briefcase, produced a manila folder, slid it across the table. No label, no markings. I opened it. Inside, 6 photos. All grainy, low-resolution surveillance stills from various years and countries. Different cities, different names. But all with one repeated pattern, a blurred woman in the background, often mid-step, mid-turn, always watching. In one, she was in a train station in Warsaw, 2009. In another, Istanbul, 2011. Another, Marseille, 2016. They all had the same detail, a small, bright red insignia barely visible on the cuff of her sleeve. I knew that color. It wasn't from the military. It was from something older, something buried. He tapped one photo. This was taken during a meeting we weren't supposed to know about. 2 diplomats died in an elevator shaft that same evening. No survivors, except this. He paused. You were there. I looked at the photo. I didn't see my face. But something in the posture? The angle of the shoulder? I don't remember, I said. He nodded, like he expected that. Of course you don't. Something in my spine locked up. When the meeting ended, I was escorted out the back. A concrete hallway, one light flickering. My notebook was gone. I hadn't noticed it missing until we were halfway to the exit. I stopped walking. The escort agent Harper reached for his comm. Where's my notebook? I asked. It'll be returned, he said. He was lying. I could tell by the way his jaw clicked when he spoke. I was taken to a new desk the next day. Different floor, no nameplate, just a terminal, a chair, and a clock that didn't tick. I found a sealed envelope in the drawer. No return name, just my old call sign, Rook Echo, written in faded blue ink. Inside one page, a list of names I hadn't heard in years, not since Kabul, not since the ones who didn't come back. The first name was mine. Next to it, Shadow Class Watchpoint variant. Memory integrity. 57%. I stared at that number for a long time. They had measured me. I lit the candle that night. The one I kept hidden in a carved wooden box wrapped in oilcloth. It had come from a vigil we held after Ruiz died. We weren't supposed to hold vigils not during Black Ops rotation, but we did. 5 of us. 1 candle each. Mine was the only one that didn't go out. I lit it again. Let it burn through midnight. When I went to sleep, I dreamt of a corridor lined with mirrors, and in every reflection, I saw a woman in a red coat walking away from me, always just out of reach. The next morning, I found a plain envelope slid under my apartment door. Inside was my notebook. The last page was newly written. A message in handwriting I didn't recognize. You see what they erase? No signature, just a small hand-drawn key. They didn't teach us how to sleep lightly. That part just happens. After war, after loss, after being told that dreams are fine until you speak them out loud. You learn to sleep with your teeth clenched. With one eye half open, you learn to keep something burning. For me, it was the candle. It was a small thing. Sand-colored wax warped from heat wick slightly off-center. I used to tell myself it was sentimental, something from the past I hadn't quite let go of. But the truth was, I lit it because I needed to know when something changed. Candles don't lie. They flicker when air moves. They fade when breath enters a room. They burn straight when no one's watching. That night, it burned too clean, as if even the shadows had stepped back. The envelope with my notebook was still on the counter. I hadn't touched it since reading the message. I kept thinking about the word erase and how clinical it sounded. Not forget. Not lose. Erase, like I had been wiped down and repurposed. At work, I didn't speak. My new desk was near the east wall beside a dead phone line and a shelf of redacted personnel files. The digital clock on the wall was 3 minutes fast, but it never changed. Someone had installed a looped video feed in place of the actual time. I recognized the man who passed my desk at 10:17. Tall coat a little too loose at the shoulders, scar above his left brow. We had served in overlapping rotations, though I don't think we ever exchanged words. He looked at me like he remembered something about me, but couldn't quite place it. Memory's a funny thing. The next operation briefing I was invited to was for something they called Cascade Variant. I wasn't listed on the docket, but someone had typed my name into the projection notes twice. Once as observing officer, and once as origin tag. That second title didn't exist in any official documentation. The lead presenter, a tech analyst named Cartwright, kept glancing at me like I was part of the problem. His slides were filled with signal paths, encryption, echo trails, and references to dormant digital footprints traced back to 2012. Kandahar. Again. I watched the screen. I kept my hands folded. No one noticed I wasn't taking notes. I didn't need to. The sequence they were dissecting, the one buried inside these code bursts, they called it Fragment Delta 9. I knew it by a different name. We used to call it the Ring Pulse. It was a comms failsafe we'd designed ourselves, back when we were stripped of satellite uplink in a dead zone during rotation, Charlie. It was lo-fi analog adapted, intentionally sloppy, but it worked. We buried the signature in local signal traffic so deep that even our superiors couldn't find it. Someone had found it now, and they were calling it foreign. After the meeting, I asked Cartwright, who had first identified the fragment. He blinked like I'd slapped him. I didn't think you were cleared to. I'm not, I said. Humor me. He hesitated, then said the Prime Minister's office forwarded the first trace. Direct, with a recommendation. He didn't need to say who the recommendation was for. When I got home that night, I checked the drawer under my kitchen sink, where I kept the old operations maps, the coin from my last field promotion, and the list of names I'd written after Operation Frostmouth. The candle was still burning. 10 hours. Wax pooled, but the flame never even leaned. The windows were shut, no airflow, no trick of the breeze. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Somewhere between 2 and 4 a.m., I sat down at my kitchen table and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a signal sequence by hand. It came back too easily, like a song from childhood. I wrote it in layers, symbol first, then timing markers, then pulse gaps. What I ended up with wasn't a message. It was a memory, one I hadn't realized I still carried. In the bottom right corner, I drew a small candle. Then a door. Then a key. The same 3 symbols had been scratched faintly into the back of my notebook underneath the binding. I hadn't noticed until I pressed the page against the window light and tilted it. Candle. Door. Key. I thought of the woman in the photos again. The red coat, the turned back, always walking away. Was I watching her, or had she been watching me? At 5:07 a.m., my burner phone vibrated once. A message. No number, no trace. 3 words. It never went out. I stepped outside. The street was silent. No footsteps. No birds. Even the wind felt paused. I walked 2 blocks before I saw the man in the black coat across the intersection. Same stance, same tilt of the head. The one I remembered from the surveillance photo in Marseille. He didn't approach. He didn't wave. He just stood still, waiting. I didn't cross. I went back upstairs. The candle was still lit, and on the table beside it, there was a new object I hadn't left. A tiny brass key. Cold to the touch. No tag. Just a small engraving along the side vault E. I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid. Because I finally remembered something I wasn't supposed to. And the candle just kept burning. It's strange what sticks in your mind. You can forget faces, forget names, even forget what pain felt like. But colors stay. Especially when they don't belong. The first time I saw her was through a shattered cafe window in Sarajevo winter of 2007. She was across the street, walking steadily through fresh snow. Everything around her was gray cars, building sky. But her coat was red. Not maroon, not wine-dark red, like warning lights, like arterial blood. I thought she was a civilian. She was too young, too precise in the way she stepped, like someone who didn't know they were being watched. Or someone who absolutely did. We were tracking a soft target that day. Diplomatic runner burned identity about to cross into hostile territory. He never showed. Instead, our signal intercept caught a 5-second burst in a language no one could place. The code embedded in that signal was almost playful. Complex, looping, recursive, but only one phrase came through clear in the translation software. She watches the watchers. That line had been buried for years, just a footnote in an archived debrief. But last week the Prime Minister recited it to me like a nursery rhyme. Word for word, same lilt, same pause on the second watchers. He shouldn't have known that phrase. Not unless someone had given him access to my logs. When he mentioned Sarajevo, I felt something I hadn't in years. Not fear recognition. Because I had dreamed about her. Again and again. That same red coat, that same slow step, always walking away, never turning back. I'd tried to tell myself it was just memory, that the brain stitched strange tapestries from trauma. But now I wasn't so sure. I opened my notebook that night and went back to the earliest pages, operations scrawled in half-legible ink, asterisks, side notes, shorthand only I could follow. Page 17 held a line I didn't remember writing. She turned once. Just once. That chilled me. Not because of the words, but because I remembered why I'd written them. It had happened in Marseille. We were trailing a diplomat with a history of back-channel leaks. Our team split into thirds, rotating shadows on foot and car. I was assigned to upper-level surveillance hotel rooftop. When he entered the hotel, a second figure passed him on the steps. No interaction, no glance, just a red coat brushing past. She paused, tilted her head slightly, looked up, right at me, and smiled. I had never told anyone that. Not in a report, not in a debrief, not even in the mirror. I told myself it was a trick of the angle, a coincidence, a false memory. But now that image had returned, clear as ever. At work, I pulled the raw footage from the Marseille file. It should have been deleted after the operation was marked inactive, but someone had preserved it almost lovingly. The metadata showed that it had been accessed 6 times since I joined the department. Each time by a different encrypted login. Each time between 2 and 4 a.m. Someone had been watching her. Or me, or both. I isolated a single frame, her reflection in the glass of a storefront window. Behind her, blurred in the background, was my face, not from the rooftop. From the street. From an angle I couldn't have occupied. There was no possible way. Unless something had been altered, not the footage. Me. I checked my medical files, memory assessments, post-deployment scans. They were pristine. Too pristine. No one comes back from what I did with a clean slate, unless someone scrubbed it. There's an implant scar behind my right ear. Everyone always assumed it was a comms wire removed too late. But now I couldn't remember the procedure. Couldn't recall a hospital. No records, no notes. I booked an appointment with a private neuroclinic under a fake name. Told them it was for a veteran's study. They scanned me, ran quiet tests in a cold room. The technician blinked at the results. "You have embedded architecture here," she said. "But it's dormant, and it's old." "How old?" I asked. She hesitated. Pre-2008, possibly earlier, military grade, but the encryption isn't American. I left before she could finish the report. That night, I lit the candle again, and I waited. Around 3:12 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Not loud, just a tap, then a second. Rhythmic, like Morse. When I opened it, the hallway was empty, but at the foot of the door was a photograph. Black and white. Sarajevo, the girl in the red coat. But this time, she wasn't walking away. She was facing the camera, and she had my face. You can't scream when the truth fits too neatly. I sat down, watched the candle. The flame didn't flicker. It leaned slightly, toward the window. Like something had just moved past it. I used to trace the edges of my scars in the dark. The one along my right thigh was from a rotor strike during an extraction gone wrong. The thin line under my jaw, razor wire, 2010. The worst one was invisible, a stretch of dead nerve from a static shock that shut my left hand down for 6 hours during an op in Yemen. No one ever wrote that in the mission log. They just marked it as minor delay. But the body remembers what the reports erase. And now my scars were itching again. All of them, in sequence, like someone had mapped them or activated them. I began sketching again. It wasn't deliberate at first, just small shapes on scraps of paper, dots, arcs, alignment patterns. I didn't realize what I was doing until the 4th or 5th sheet. I was drawing a map, but it wasn't a place, it was a pattern, a sequence of moments, symbols, sensory fragments, a lattice of scars and memory. And at the center of it all, again and again, was the red coat. I started cataloging what I remembered. Every name that had surfaced since the Prime Minister said mine out loud. Every word that felt like a key. Mather. Frostmouth. Interface. Vault E. I plotted them as nodes, like field deployments, like war theory, like stars. There was a pattern, diagonal lines through time and incident. And along one of those lines was the name I hadn't dared write before Ruiz. I stared at her name for a long time. The night she died, she handed me something small before walking into that building. I never opened it. I don't remember why. The field logs said the structure exploded less than a minute later. But I always felt like that wasn't quite right. Like something else had happened. I looked through my archive box again. The one with all the items I was supposed to destroy. At the bottom was a silver case, thumb-sized. I hadn't seen it in years. It had no seams, no latch, no print. And yet, when I held it, it opened. Inside was a micro drive, scratched, damaged, but still intact. I took it to an offline reader I'd rigged during my signal rotation days, isolated power, analog bypass, no network bleed. The drive contained exactly one file. Callahan, root, init, echo. I opened it, and the screen went black. Then, do not trust Harding. Then it looped, Harding. The man who recruited me back into the program? The one I was told died in Berlin? The one who reappeared like nothing had changed? I remembered his exact words when I asked him what this all meant. Who said you had anything left to lose? That was never a question. That was a test. I didn't sleep. I rechecked my flat. Nothing out of place except a framed photo slightly off angle on the mantel. I hadn't touched it. Behind it, I found a note. Handwritten, no signature. You're the only one who can finish the map. Beneath the note, a tiny object wrapped in black cloth, a matchbook from a long-defunct hotel in Munich. Inside, a number scrawled in pencil. I called it from a secure line. The voice on the other end was female. Familiar. Calm. You've come this far, she said. Now ask yourself why the scars line up. Then the line went dead. I stared at my reflection in the window. The candle flame behind me looked like it was burning inside my chest. I traced my thigh, jaw, neck. The old damage. They weren't just wounds, they were coordinates, markers, waypoints on a map that was never meant to be read. I went back to my sketches, lined them up, overlaid the nodes. It formed a symbol. One I recognized. Not military, not intelligence. It was a variation of an old chess opening. The Rook's Gambit. My call sign. Rook Echo. I wasn't part of the operation. I was the operation. The entrance to the facility wasn't on any map. No signage, no clearance pad, not even a fake front. Just an old warehouse with rotted siding and a keypad under a broken floodlight. I keyed in the number from the Munich matchbook. The door buzzed open like it had been waiting. Inside, nothing. Empty concrete. Then, a mechanical hum beneath my feet, and the floor lowered 10 feet into cold darkness. The walls moved with us, a square coffin sinking into a throat of silence. I didn't flinch. They called it Level 7, but there were no indicators, no lights, no floor numbers, only a narrow hallway that smelled faintly of ozone and steel polish. At the end was a door with no knob. It opened on its own. Colonel Harding was inside. He looked older than I remembered, paler. Same eyes, though sharp like knives resting underwater. He motioned for me to sit. I didn't. Long time, he said. I thought you were dead, I replied. Sometimes dead is the only way to stay useful. His office was nothing like the rest of the building. Dark wood desk leather chairs, maps pinned to corkboard. One map in particular caught my eye. Northern Europe with red threads connecting cities I'd visited under assumed identities. Threads converged in one spot, Tallinn. I know you have questions, he said. You left me to rot, I said. You scrubbed my memory. He sighed, but it wasn't regret. It was precision. We didn't erase you. We hid you, and not for the reasons you think. He slid a folder toward me, thin, no markings. Inside, 3 photos. The girl in the red coat, Sarajevo, Marseille, and Munich. But this time, a 4th photo followed. It was me, but not me, standing beside her, looking directly at the camera. You're looking at a failed closure protocol, he said. We tried to remove her from every sequence, but the interface rejected the operation. You were the fallback. The mirror? I don't understand, I said, and I hated the sound of those words. He pointed to the windowless wall. You remember the child in the bunker? The one who didn't speak? I nodded slowly. She wasn't a civilian. She was the first model. Model. She's not real, I asked. She's not singular, he said. She's an intelligence tether, a marker. Wherever she appears, convergence accelerates. And what am I? Harding looked me dead in the eyes. You're the index, the vault. You stored the code no one else could carry without losing cohesion. The candle, the red coat, the scars. They weren't coincidences. They were fail-safes, recovery anchors. You used me. He nodded. Yes, because you could survive it. Because you already had. He stood, walked to a cabinet, removed a small black case, pressed his thumb to a reader. The lid opened. Inside was a single object, a piece of clear crystal smooth-edged with something suspended in the center. A key, identical to the one I found beside the candle. This is the original, he said. The others are echoes. You don't carry just memory, Callahan. You carry access. I felt something shift inside me like a thread pulling taut. My right ear rang. My fingertips went cold. You brought me here to reactivate something, I said. We brought you here to finish it. I left the room before I understood what that meant. In the elevator on the way up, the walls didn't move this time. The floor just rose silent and slow. Back at the surface, the air felt wrong. Too clean. Too still. I checked my phone. No signal, no timestamp. Just a single notification, interface status pending. Awaiting convergence. At home, I found the candle on my table still warm. I hadn't lit it, but it had burned. A fine circle of wax had pooled beside the matchbox. And next to it, my notebook, open to a page I hadn't written. The vault isn't a place. It's a person. Underneath a drawing of a red coat hanging on a hook. And beside that, the scar map. But now the lines formed something new. Not a route, not a message, a face. Mine. They gave it a clean name, Operation Doorframe, like it was just another logistics exercise, like we weren't crawling into the ribs of something ancient and buried and entirely alive. I was briefed alone, no team, no observers. Just a single document printed on non-reproducible polymer that dissolved 5 minutes after being exposed to air. I read it slowly. The words felt wrong. The objective: investigate and trace the origin of a signal anomaly disrupting high-level diplomatic comms between two Baltic states. The anomaly was classified as non-malicious, but persistent, a technological specter. Only, it wasn't. The coordinates led to a rural border post abandoned since the 90s, reclaimed by forest. Satellite flyovers showed no activity, but on the ground, the signal was pulsing. Regular intervals, old frequency. And embedded within that signal was a code I had traced before. Once. In Kandahar. I knew it without decoding. It was ours. We had made it, hidden it, and now it had come back. I flew under cover of a diplomatic asset audit, landed in Tallinn, met with a liaison who never gave his name. We drove in silence. He smelled like metal and pine. The border post was a husk roof collapsed brick yellow with mold, but as we stepped inside, my fingers buzzed. Not nerves, not fear. Recognition. Like muscle memory in the bones. I walked straight to the back wall, brushed away soot. There, barely visible, was a symbol etched into the plaster. A doorway outlined in red chalk. Inside the outline, 4 initials. EBCC. My name. Elena Brooke Callahan. But not mine. Not a signature. A designation. I didn't say anything. I just pressed my hand to the wall. It was warm. The air changed, and then the pulse started again, deep like a breath drawn beneath concrete. My escort tensed. We need to go. I didn't move, because inside my skull a voice had started. Female, calm, precise. Interface key recognized. Doorframe sequence unlocked. My knees buckled. Blood roared in my ears. My hand stayed on the wall. And behind my eyes, I saw the girl in the red coat, always walking down corridors of light that bent like liquid. Then she stopped. And turned. Her face was mine. But younger. Cleaner. She opened her mouth and said something I couldn't hear. Then everything snapped back. The wall was cool again. The symbol was gone. And the candle in my pocket, yes, I'd carried it with me without thinking, had melted. No flame, just heat. Back at the temporary safe house, I ran diagnostics on the signal I'd recorded. It wasn't a message. It was a call response protocol. And the structure of the signal matched something we used for drone-based synchronization. Except it was reversed. Instead of aligning objects to a master signal, it searched for the signal bearer. It was looking for me. The interface. The vault. Harding had known. That much was clear. But he hadn't told me that Operation Doorframe wasn't about shutting down the signal. It was about bringing me to it. And I had responded. The following morning, I found a package outside the safe house. No address. Just my name, Callahan, written in red ink. Inside a key. Not brass. Glass. Perfectly clear. And a piece of paper. 3 words. She is waking. That night, I sat with my notebook open, candle lit again. I sketched the shape of the border post, the sequence of signal bursts, the look on the girl's face when she turned. She hadn't looked surprised. She had looked sad, as if she knew exactly what I would become, as if she'd seen it all before. Because maybe she had. Maybe I wasn't the first. Maybe I was just the one who answered. The Prime Minister didn't return with an entourage this time. No convoy, no theater. Just a nondescript black sedan pulling up to the south garage. He stepped out alone. No aides, no visible security. That told me more than 1,000 words ever could. They sent me to briefing room 5, deep underground, low ceilings, gray carpet, the hum of machines embedded in the walls. The kind of room meant for confessions, not collaboration. I waited with a glass of water I didn't touch. The candle was in my pocket again, even though I hadn't remembered packing it. Still warm. When he entered, He looked older, paler, but not unsteady. The PM walked like a man who understood he was being watched, even in silence. He set a sealed folder on the table between us. Then he sat slowly. No handshake, no nod. We didn't speak for 5 full minutes. Then he said quietly, "How did you know about convergence protocol?" I didn't answer, because I hadn't. Not until now. Not until I saw those words printed on the folder. Convergence Protocol, Class V. I stared at the folder, then at him. I didn't know I said. I remembered. He tapped once on the folder. Page 3. I opened it. It wasn't text. It was a schematic. A neural lattice grid, messy and layered. At the center, a node labeled Callahan, primary interface, and beside it, Redcott, recursive mirror agent. I didn't feel the air leave my lungs, but I noticed I had stopped breathing. "She's not just a person," I said. "She's part of the system." He nodded slowly. "You saw her before any of us did," he said, "because she was calibrated to you. That was the original fault line. They didn't know you'd retain fragments after the disconnect." I looked up. Disconnect from what he didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his jacket and placed a second file on the table. Slim, wrapped in black cloth. "Your file," he said. I hesitated, then opened it. There was only one sheet inside, handwritten. The paper smelled faintly of oil and winter. Subject: Callahan, Elena Brooke. Status: Fragmented Interface Entity, FIE Function, Anchor, Retrieval, Vault Memory, Integrity, 52% decreasing recall nodes activated, 5-7 event threshold approaching. At the bottom, if she begins to remember in sequence, do not intervene. I sat back, closed my eyes. My fingertips had begun to throb. The candle in my pocket felt hot, pulsing like a second heart. "You're not here for a briefing," I said. "You're here to see what happens next." He didn't deny it. "You're the only one who ever survived a tether remerge," he said. "The rest degraded, or disappeared." "Ruiz," I said. His face barely moved. "She was one of the earliest. We didn't know the signal would affect interface proximity. She gave me the drive. She gave you herself." I stood up. I had to. My hands were trembling. Not fear, not shock. A pulse. Like I was sinking to something out of range. "Convergence isn't an event," I said aloud without thinking. "It's a function." He looked at me like he already knew. "Everything is folding in," I said. "The girl in the red coat, the signals, the maps, they're not breadcrumbs. They're calibration." "And the doorframe?" he asked. "It's not architecture," I said. "It's me. I'm the doorframe." He stood now too, slowly, with a weight that wasn't just physical. "When this begins," he said, "you may not remember me, or her, or yourself. But the signal will find you. It always does." I stared at him. "Why me?" He paused. "Because you're the only one who didn't run from the silence." He turned and walked out without another word. I didn't follow. I sat down again, opened the file one more time, traced my name with my finger. Then I reached into my coat and pulled out the candle. Lit it with the only match I had left. The flame rose clean, no flicker, and from somewhere in the room, maybe the walls, maybe inside my own head, I heard a voice. Hers, 6 of 7, 1 remains. Then silence. Not emptiness, not absence, alignment. Briggs disappeared on a Thursday. No announcement, no handoff, not even a lie. His desk was cleared like he'd never existed. The new handler arrived that afternoon, blonde, too clean, too crisp. The kind of man who folded his cuffs the way protocol manuals suggested, but no one ever really followed. His name was Quinn. At least that's what the badge said. I never believed it. He asked how I was. I didn't answer. That night, my earpiece buzzed for the first time in years. A low static hum followed by a soft click. Then nothing. Except it wasn't nothing. It was a rhythm. 3 seconds on, 1 off, 3 on again. Pause. Then a voice, small, thin but familiar. A woman's voice layered under distortion. She said, "They made you forget." I froze. Because I knew that voice. But it wasn't Ruiz, and it wasn't mine. I recorded the signal, ran it through an analog filter, spliced the waveform. The data wasn't speech. It was a signature. The same signal I had seen embedded in the doorframe anomaly. It was reaching for me. The system had opened the vault, and something inside was waking up. At 3:41 a.m., I triggered an unauthorized archive access. Not from the department servers, those were scrubbed too often. I used a backdoor I had built myself during a previous audit sweep, nested 3 directories deep beneath a procurement system no one monitored. There I found what I hadn't dared look for before: a record labeled Event Callahan, Redcott, Cross Origin Failure. The log was short, 3 lines. Subject: Callahan temporarily severed from host index. Visual anomaly, recursive mirror not contained. Result: partial memory re-encoding. Tether instability unresolved. There was no timestamp. Just a code, SIL 1.17. I'd seen that code before. On a chalkboard in Kandahar, scribbled by a technician who died 2 hours later when our comms tent caught fire. The static came back later that night. No voice this time, just the noise building and building until my ears rang. I pulled the earpiece out, threw it across the room. The candle on my desk flickered once, then righted itself. And in that moment, I remembered something I hadn't allowed myself to feel since Kabul. Not pain, not confusion, displacement. That bone-deep sense that I was no longer the original. That somewhere, somehow, I had been swapped out. Slightly, quietly, I found my old field comms chip at the bottom of my gearbox, the one from the drone extraction op in Yemen, still intact. I ran it through my secure drive, filtered the static. The voice returned. Clearer now. "Do not trust the map. You are the signal." I dropped the drive. I wanted to believe it was a trick or corruption or hallucination. But the rhythm of the static matched my resting heart rate. They had synchronized me. Long ago. I sat down and looked at my scar map again. Not as a memory, but as an interface grid. I marked each wound with a frequency, calculated intervals between moments of pain, moments of recall. It lined up, too precisely. They had used my trauma like clockwork. I lit the candle. It burned straight. Again. I closed my eyes. The red coat girl appeared, not walking this time, standing still, watching me. Then she opened her mouth. No sound came out, but I could see the shape of the words. Find the 7th. When I opened my eyes, I found something on the floor. An envelope I hadn't seen before, inside a photograph. Myself sitting at a table I didn't recognize in a room that didn't exist, smiling, laughing. Beside me, a man whose face had been scratched out in black ink. On the back of the photo, you said you wanted to remember? I called Quinn, asked who signed my reactivation order. He said, "You know who." I said, "I want to hear you say it." He paused, then quietly, "The Prime Minister." I hung up, not because I didn't believe him, but because I finally did. I stared at the photograph for hours. The angle was wrong. I was wrong. My face was too smooth, too soft, like a version of me that had never been in Kabul, never lost Ruiz, never lit a candle for 5 straight nights just to feel something burn. But it was me. The room was unfamiliar. Neutral walls, a white ceramic teapot, a window framing the silhouette of a high-rise skyline I couldn't place. And the man beside me, scratched out, violently. Thick black slashes carved across his face with something sharp. But even under the ink, I could see the shape of his jaw. Harding. It had to be. But if it was him, Why was I laughing? I flipped the photo again. The words still there, written in a hand I didn't recognize. You said you wanted to remember. I pressed the image to the glass of my kitchen window. Under golden hour light, faint lines shimmered like hidden ink under UV. There were coordinates, encrypted. I decoded them by instinct like breathing. It led to a long decommissioned defense archive complex outside Richmond. No one was supposed to go there. The records were listed as fire lost. But when I arrived alone, no clearance, no team, the front gate opened like it had never been shut. Inside, the temperature dropped. Not physically, just something deeper. The kind of cold that starts in the joints. I followed the blinking strip lights down a narrow hallway until I reached an unmarked room. Inside, a single metal box, the kind used to ship high-value electronics. On the lid, a piece of white tape. Callahan, do not catalog. I opened it. The first thing I saw was my notebook. Not the one I carried now. A different one. Older. Worn. I flipped it open. Page after page of handwriting that was undeniably mine, except I had no memory of ever writing them. Operations I couldn't recall. Conversations I never had. Dreams, vivid, strange, recorded in short, detached fragments. Girl on fire escape, red coat, watching, always watching. He said I was never meant to come back. They built the room for her. I just stood in it. And then on the last page, vault integrity compromised. She is not outside, she is inside. I sat down right there on the floor. My knees hurt, my fingers wouldn't stop trembling. There was something else in the box, a small round object wrapped in black silk. I unwrapped it slowly. A mirror, old bronze-edged, cracked diagonally. I lifted it toward my face. But it didn't reflect me. It showed a room dim, gold-lit, where a younger version of myself sat across from the girl in the red coat. They weren't talking, just sitting. The girl held my hand. Then the image flickered, and the mirror turned dark. I put it down, and beneath it, a thin slip of paper, not intern, interface. I left the facility without taking anything. It didn't matter. The image was already burned into me. Back at home, I found a fresh envelope on my table. No address, no mark. Inside ash, fine black flecked with gold. I brushed it aside, and beneath it a word etched into the paper itself, reactivate. I didn't know who sent it, but I knew what it meant. The 7th recall node wasn't a person. It was a moment. The one I had buried deeper than all the others. The one where I chose to forget. And now, it was waking. I took out the candle, lit it without thinking. The flame rose steady, and as it did, I heard a voice inside me say, "Begin convergence." I didn't question it, because the 7th node was me. I stopped logging my movements the next day. No more digital traces, no terminal sign-ins, no comm traffic. I let the surveillance watch me, but I didn't give it anything to collect. Silence was safer than static now. Instead, I went analog. Spiral-bound notebooks, graphite pencils, long walks with no destination. I had become too visible and yet somehow completely unreadable. I'd outlived my metadata. Quinn asked if I needed anything. I told him no. He nodded like he understood. But the slight pause in his breath gave him away. He wasn't tracking me anymore. He was reporting me. Harding didn't appear again, but I felt him in the architecture, in the way my ID badge still opened doors that hadn't opened for years, as if some deeper clearance had reawakened beneath the surface. The candle stayed lit, every night. I didn't question it anymore. I just watched it and waited. I started pulling the pieces together. Not memories, those were too fragmented, but traces. Names, faces, call signs, code words. I built a wall of them in my apartment, threads of red ink, old map signal grids. At the center, always the red coat, and beside her, always me. I didn't understand the full shape of it until I reviewed the access logs from the old Richmond archive. There had been one other access attempt after mine, 1 day later, but no entry was recorded. They didn't find what they were looking for. Because I had already taken it. Not the mirror, not the photo, the trigger. I had copied my original memory architecture, the old signal maps, the unrecoverable fragments, and encrypted them into a ghost server buried inside a defunct NGO platform. I named it Vault E. No one knew, not even Harding, but I sent it to one person. No explanation, no encryption, just an open link to the Prime Minister. It was a test, not of trust, of convergence. That night, I returned to my apartment and everything felt wrong. Not broken, not touched, stilled, like the air had been flattened. I stepped into the room and knew someone had been there. The candle was still lit, but it burned lower like it had been watched. And on the table, something new, a glass key. Same size, same shape, but now with a line etched through the center, a scar. Beneath it a single line. You said yes once before. I didn't remember saying yes, but my body did. I took the key, put it in my coat, and waited. At 2:13 a.m., the power cut out. No sirens, no movement, just an absence. Then footsteps in the stairwell, no knock. The door opened, he stepped in, no security, no clipboard, just Harding. Older, paler, a black line on his left wrist. He didn't speak. I didn't ask. I reached into my coat, pulled out the glass key, placed it on the table. He looked at it for a long time, then whispered, "You know what you are." "I'm not the interface," I said. "I'm the lock." His mouth twitched. Not a smile, not quite. He nodded. Then he turned and left. I sat there for a long time. Watched the candle. It flickered once and stayed lit. I woke up to ocean fog, salt on the air. White sheets of blank ceiling light filtering in like it had been softened by memory itself. Not a hospital, not a safe house. Something between. I sat up slowly. My shoulder clicked familiar. My head didn't ache, but my mouth was dry like I hadn't spoken in days. The room was minimalist. One chair, one table, one window too narrow to crawl through. And on the table, my candle still warm, lit. Next to it, a sealed envelope. No name, no seal, just a wax imprint, the red coat symbol. My hands didn't shake as I opened it. Inside, Operation Callahan reactivated, a folder. Thin, black, not like the others. This one was soft, like skin. Inside were 6 documents. 5 were personnel sheets, codename level. All agents I remembered, all presumed dead. Ruiz, Briggs, Cartwright, Harper, and one name that had never appeared in any record, Echo 1-17. No face, no biometrics, just a note, mirror unit, synthetic tether. Redcot protocol failed to decompile. Subject remains linked. The 6th document was mine. Not a profile, a manifest. Callahan Elena Brooke class interface host. Primary recall vessel tether capacity. 100% recovery stability variable memory rebuild. 72% note subject survived recursive break. Vault reconstructed around core trauma. Reinstatement authorized. At the bottom, handwritten, she was never the intern. She was the vault. I didn't cry. I thought I would. But instead, I laughed. Once, short, like an echo in my own mouth. On the bedside table, a fresh uniform lay folded. Not departmental, not civilian. Military. Dress blacks. Rank insignia I didn't recognize, too old, too specialized. Symbols of a branch that never existed. There was a mirror on the wall. I stood in front of it, looked at my face. I had aged, scar under the jaw. The tired weight in my eyes. But I was whole. For the first time in over a decade, I felt aligned. The candle flickered again, then stilled. I looked down, at the floor, and realized this wasn't the same place I'd woken up in before. This was the room, the one from the photograph. Same table, same window. Except this time, I was alone. No laughing, no scratched-out man. Just me. And on the table, a card had appeared beside the folder. When the vault remembers, the door opens. I stepped toward the only exit. A single metal door, white seamless. I expected it to need the key, but before I could reach into my coat, it opened. No sound, no warning. Just light spilling in, golden and wide. Outside, a long corridor lined with frames. Not photos, not paintings, mirrors. In each, I caught glimpses not of me, not always, but of versions. Me in uniform, me barefoot in the cobble dust, me lighting the candle in a tent, and one frame showed her, red coat, walking. Only this time she turned. She looked straight through the glass and smiled. I nodded. She vanished, and I walked toward the light. No more doors, no more locks. Just the truth unfolding quietly. I arrived in D.C. without a single file. No briefcase, no escort, no orders. Just a black dress uniform I hadn't known I still owned, worn like second skin, every line precise. I didn't need clearance anymore. I was the clearance. The halls of the department were quieter now. People moved differently, slower, like sound itself respected the walls. They looked at me, but didn't speak. No one used my title. They didn't have to. A young aide stepped into my path outside the main rotunda. He looked too new to understand what any of it meant. He stared at the insignia on my collar, then stepped aside. Inside the Hall of Silent Honors was colder than I remembered. They kept the lights low on purpose, the air dry to preserve the flags and plaques and things we were never meant to talk about. There was a new frame on the far wall. It hadn't been there before. I knew what it was before I saw it. A photograph. Me. Not recent, taken sometime in the last year, waist-up black uniform ribbon row, sharp and blinding. I don't remember posing for it, but I remember how I felt when I looked at it. Still, present, seen. They had titled the plaque below with nothing but one line, "The Door That Remembers." The Prime Minister stood at the far end of the room, alone, no advisors, no speech. He nodded once, small, precise. I returned the nod. No words. There were none left that mattered. He turned and left me there. In the reflection on the polished floor, I saw her again. The girl, red coat, but not a child anymore. Not even a ghost, just a shape I had carried with me for too long. She turned like always, walked toward the far doorway. This time, I didn't follow, because I didn't have to. The candle had gone out at dawn, not flickered, not struggled, just finished. I stepped forward, heels silent on stone. The door at the end opened before I reached it. Outside sunlight, sky sharp and blue, wind folding gently through the flag above. And for a long moment, I stood in the threshold. Not the intern, not the interface, not the vault. Just Elena Brooke Callahan. And I raised my hand slowly, deliberately, into a quiet salute. Not for them, not even for her. For the version of me that walked through every locked door and still came back. Whole.